May the Lord give you peace. Welcome to Hold Back Nothing. I am Brother Tyler Harris, and I'm a young friar who fell in love with the beautiful and dynamic way of seeing the world and growing in relationship with Christ that is our Franciscan vision. This series is all about exploring that rich and diverse Franciscan heritage, spirituality, and way of life. The Franciscan tradition is often recognized for its care for creation, given the popular images of St. Francis of Assisi preaching to the animals and flowers. However, the reasons behind St. Francis's great love for creation are often very misunderstood. In 2015, Pope Francis drew on St. Francis's famous Canticle to Brother Sun and Sister Moon and the theology of St. Bonaventure to urgently appeal to all people of goodwill to reconsider their relationships with all creation and seek out concrete solutions to environmental crises that inflict great pain and suffering on our poorest brothers and sisters. The Pope's encyclical, Laudato Si, is a deeply Franciscan document and notes that St. Francis's approach to creation was not some naive romanticism, but rather an act of universal reconciliation that cherished the closely intertwining relationships between love of God, care for creation, and care for the poor. Pope Francis also makes some incredible statements in Laudato Si about the Eucharist as the living center of the universe that leads all creation to union with the Creator. Here to help us reflect on the Eucharist in light of pressing environmental crises is Franciscan friar Jimmy Kernan, who in his Franciscan life has pursued a master's degree in molecular engineering at the University of Chicago and is currently teaching physics at Siena College, where he is also the assistant director for research in the Laudato Si Center for Integral Ecology. Brother Jimmy, welcome.
Hi, Tyler. It's great to be here with you today. It's a great privilege to share this conversation together and talk about a few things I really deeply love.
Thank you so much for spending this time together. And this is a topic of great importance to our world in the present time. But as Franciscans, it's something that's deeply embedded in our life. In the Franciscan world, we have this classic saying that when you've met one friar, you've only met one friar, since every friar's journey is unique. To get us started, Jimmy, can you walk us through your Franciscan journey that has a real unique focus on science and care for creation?
Yeah, of course. I think my Franciscan journey really started at St. Bonaventure University. I was there, I was studying physics at the time. And after I graduated, I'd really fallen in love with the Friars, my time there, and joined the Friars. And after my first few years in the Friars, I was out working in San Francisco, the Tenderloin there. And I was working with people who were living on the street, facing addiction, going through some just really challenging times in their life. And while I was there, I had to kind of start thinking about what was next. I knew I was there for a year and had to start thinking about, what do I want to do in school? What do I kind of want to spend my career on? And I had this background in science, and something was kind of drawing me back to that of, I'd really like to go back to school, maybe get an advanced degree. And I'm talking about this with a friar there, Ray Bucher, and I'm talking about this, like going back to school, and he just looks at me. He's like, what are you going to do for the poor? And that really kind of narrowed my focus in of, like, I need to make sure that the work that I'm doing is oriented towards people who are on kind of the margins of society, who are disadvantaged and stuff. So when I started looking for programs, looking for different ideas of what I study, I kind of fell into this really focusing around kind of energy transition, of needing to kind of get off of fossil fuels, look at renewable energy. So ended up going to the University of Chicago, which had a great program there to kind of develop, my focus on energy and kind of really the science and the technology focus. But a lot of our work there was also around, what are the things that you need to think about when you do this type of stuff? What are the cultural, the business, the economic implications of it? And it was really interesting to kind of be in a setting where they were talking about integral ecology and sustainability as we do as Franciscans, without really having maybe the language for it that we as friars do. So it's been a really great opportunity to go from there, and then now to be at Siena and teaching some of these topics of teaching energy and environment. Teaching about different energy systems, the positives and the negatives of all of them, and but also looking at some of the environmental impacts and the need to make transitions, while also looking at some of these other issues, the politics, the economy, in some of these things. And then also at Siena, as you mentioned, get to be a part of the Laudato Si Center here, and where we're really looking to kind of build a global network of Franciscan colleges, universities to really give resources to help people advocate for these things that Pope Francis calls us to in Laudato Si, to really work together to build on integral ecology, and whether it's in pushing for new technology to be put in and implemented in our communities, but also for advocacy and justice at the kind of the lobbying and political level, as well as really showing people that no matter what you do, what your career path is, there's ways to participate in this. And we're kind of looking to give people the tools to do that effectively.
The Laudato Si Center's vision is incredibly inspiring. It's very deeply needed in our world today. It's ambitious, and very exciting. You've been incredibly busy in recent weeks, launching a really momentous symposium at Siena. Can you tell us about a really major event you had this past weekend at Siena?
Yes, I'd love to. So it's this school year, since I've been here at Siena, we've been running around kind of nonstop and really putting on this huge event that we had this past weekend of Earth's Cry, Humanity's Call. And it was really kind of a way of looking at Pope Francis's to respond to the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. So it's this response to kind of Pope Francis, and really the sense of, yeah, like I think we talk a lot about these issues. We know that there's challenges with environment, with climate, that go deep from the climate, but also in health and the political landscape, and things, with war being an influence. And so we took the opportunity to really not just inform people about these, but also give people, like I said, our goal is kind of the tools to respond. What are we to do? How are we to respond? What's our calling on this? So we are able to have a wonderful kind of slate of speakers, including Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Gutierrez, address the college, which was really for us kind of a once in a lifetime opportunity to have someone of that kind of profile and status addressing Siena College and those participating in the symposium very directly about how, from his global perspective, how we need to be responding to this, and also just to have the sense of really a global connection of that we had the privilege of receiving a personal letter from Pope Francis in support of what we were doing, to show kind of the sport, like he's like, thank you for doing this and supporting this even 10 years after Laudato Si, or we're almost at 10 years. This idea of like, yeah, this is still important. We're still working on this, and we're still responding to this call that he gave all of us. So it was a really great privilege to be a part of this, to hear all of these wonderful speakers from these different global and kind of local to this area as well, perspectives on these challenges and these issues. And it turned out to be a really wonderful event.
Your Franciscan humility is really coming through. You getting attention of the Secretary General of the United Nations is incredible, and then you top that off with a personal letter from Pope Francis. I mean, that is just absolutely remarkable. How does it feel personally knowing that the Pope knows about what you're doing?
It's amazing. I don't think it's quite sunk in yet for me. Like even now, even after seeing it and holding this letter, and being able to read over it a few times, like it still hasn't quite sunk in. That's something that I was a part of and worked with very closely with Brother Michael Perry, former Minister General, and Brother Jacek Wojciechowski here on putting this event together. It was definitely a celebratory moment for us, and just a really great recognition that I think we're going to hold on to and appreciate for a very long time.
Well, congratulations on
Thank you.
a successful symposium, and we hope and pray for the fruits of that symposium to continue to bear fruit as more students and people go forth with excitement and renewed passion for caring for our common home.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
and I think that's for us here as we think about kind of it's this is very much the beginning of
mhm.
what we're doing. It's this is the first step of moving into some great work and great areas here and around the center, but also for the college, and as we've talked about with other Franciscan colleges and universities in the U.S., but also globally. So this is really it's a great kickoff. We've had some really great people kind of address us and support us along the way, and we hope to continue that into the future.
Absolutely. In this series, we have reflected a lot about the role of the Eucharist in revitalizing our care for the poor and forging deeper relationships with other people. Speaking of Pope Francis in his Laudato Si presents the Eucharist as an invitation to renewed, loving relationship with all of creation. So a really expansive vision of the Eucharist that he presents to us. What I'd like to do today is focus on Laudato Si's sections on the Eucharist and reflect with you on how to make sense of these passages and their calls to action in light of our Franciscan tradition. So to begin with, after addressing how all creatures find their true meaning in Jesus Christ, Pope Francis writes, "It is in the Eucharist that all that has been created finds its greatest exaltation. The Lord chose to reach our intimate depths through a fragment of matter. He comes that we might find him in this world of ours." This is beautiful language. When Pope Francis is writing about care for creation and challenging us to expand our vision, it's incredibly beautiful, incredibly inspiring. But there's a lot to unpack there. So, how do you make sense of this as a Franciscan, Jimmy?
Bonaventure, the Itinerarium, writes like that we should be led to contemplation of God in all creatures. And as I was kind of thinking about it, it's like if we look at all creation around us, we look at the world, the created world, and we can see that, like, in many cases, it's beautiful. There's so much beauty that can be found in the created world. And it's like we love looking kind of like the images and going into like the mountains, and especially in the Northeast here. And we're kind of in the peak of fall right now. So it's the beautiful colors of the leaves changing and shifting. And as we're getting ready to kind of enter into winter. And I think kind of what Bonaventure says here and how we can look at it today in kind of our own Franciscan lenses, it's almost like looking at a painting, looking at kind of the entire created world as this painting. And as if we look at paintings, it's if we look and contemplate deep enough on it and look at the particular style, the colors that were used, it can tell us a lot about its creator, its artist. And I think that we can look at the world in the same way. And it's, do we look at the created world and are we looking for maybe that, like that signature on the painting? Do we look at the style and the beauty and kind of the color and the way that things have kind of been formed and integrated together? There's kind of this way of like, yeah, do we recognize the creator and look to see the creator in all of that? So I think that can be just a really great way to first approach kind of this created world. And for Pope Francis here, as he talks about Laudato Si, it's in all of that, above all, we get the Eucharist as kind of the center and the is I think he used the word like the greatest exaltation of this creation. And I think with the kind of the beauty of the Eucharist in that is the elements that starts with the bread and wine. It comes from the earth. It comes from this created world that St. Francis, that St. Bonaventure kind of lead us and kind of urge us to look at. So it's this sense of like, oh yeah, the bread that becomes Christ, the wine from the grapes that become like the blood of Christ, like that that connection into the created world, I think is a really great way to say that, like, oh yeah, like um, we use this in our sense, in our liturgy. We use things from the created world that God has given us, that God created us to be able to do this. And so it's kind of that sense of really everything kind of originates from God, and from the sense of like the created world as well, of that from God in the creation, we can see these amazing works. We can see kind of the signature in the painting, to go back to that analogy, but it's from that we get this kind of beautiful gift with the continued grace of God, of Eucharist.
Absolutely. And elsewhere, Bonaventure writes about the created world as a kind of book, reflecting and describing its maker, the Trinity, really approaching the universe, approaching creation as a means to teach us. So I
Mhm.
love how the example you gave of in the Eucharist, we have this very humble bread, very humble fruits of wheat and the fruits of the vine and in the wine. Um, it shows something about the humility of God, the humility of Christ who enters deeply, intimately into our life. And I think if we were to really pay attention to the particularities of creation, and especially the Eucharist, to let it teach us that humility, may open our eyes a little bit more to the profound awareness of the giftedness, the goodness of creation around us. I think Pope Francis writes about, he warns about the challenges of uh, consumerism and the throwaway culture that kind of misses out on that giftedness.
I think it's so fitting to the humility of Christ, of like in the incarnation of Christ came to be with us, to really enter in fully
Mhm.
into the world and into this created world, and continues to do so, from for us, like this kind of the humble and simple elements for human creation, in that we're very much a part of this created world. And so for Christ to enter into that in the incarnation, and then also for in the Eucharist, continues to, from creation, from this gift of the material world that God has given us, we continue to encounter Christ in that.
One of the challenges I think it's very easy to fall into is to separate our spiritual life from the rest of our lived experiences, our consumption, the materials we need that we depend on for daily life. And when we make those separations, it's easy to miss out on that giftedness, the goodness of all of creation. I think that's one of the benefits of when Pope Francis continues in his writing, he presents this incredibly expansive and integrated vision of the Eucharist. He writes that the Eucharist is the living center of the universe, the
Mm.
overflowing core of love and of inexhaustible life. The whole cosmos gives thanks to God. Indeed, the Eucharist is itself an act of cosmic love. I mean, this is first we start off really humbly, the fragment of matter that we receive in the bread and wine, and then Francis expands it to cosmic proportions. How do you think about that in light of our Franciscan tradition?
I think sometimes we take the Canticle of the Creatures with Francis, Saint Francis, a little kind of for granted, of like, oh, we have brother sun and sister moon. Like, no, like, yeah, the sun that is way out there, in the universe, the 93 million miles away. Like, yeah, that sun is our brother, and the moon that's kind of orbits the Earth, that's a ways away, but also all of the stars that are spread the galaxy. So I think Francis recognizing like our connectedness to all of that, and that connectedness comes through God. It is in God that, and being a part of God's creation, that we are continue to be connected to that, and the most kind of like real expression of God, and our current, in kind of our life, and how we can experience God, like comes in that Eucharist, of that really physical presence of God in the Eucharist, and it contains all of that. It's the God of the Eucharist is the God that created our cosmos, and it almost like feels like a paradox, like, oh, like this, in such a humble way, something so expansive and great, that we're very deeply interconnected to and a part of.
Absolutely. The example of St. Francis' Canticle for the Creatures is a wonderful place, I think, to go to with this quote from Laudato Si. It speaks to this deep interconnectedness between us and all of creation. And really, it rests on the foundation that all of creation has a common older brother, Christ, the firstborn of creation. And just taking Laudato Si as a whole, I mean, the theme of interconnectedness, of interrelationship, I think those phrases come up over 20 times throughout the whole document. It is a profound theme throughout Pope Francis's writings of seeing our deep relationship, not just with one another, but with the entirety of creation. And the Eucharist really focusing when we go to Mass, yes, there's a deeply intimate, profound moment of love between us and God, but it's sending us forth to see that profound connectedness in all aspects of our life. I wonder, Jimmy, what are some maybe practical calls to action that this might be to consider in integrating that vision of our connectedness in our day-to-day life?
One thing that really strikes me from St. Bonaventure in the Itinerarium is he often refers to God as timeless. And part of this, and really doesn't say much else about it, as he says, as he kind of keeps throwing it in there in his kind of litanies of descriptions of God. And but timeless is one that has always stood out to me as I've read the Itinerarium, and part of that timelessness they see is, especially as we can kind of consider Eucharist and our personal connection to it, is the Eucharist that we go to and we receive in Mass is the Eucharist of the saints of past. It's the same Eucharist that St. Francis would receive and his brothers would receive. It's the same Eucharist. It's also the same Eucharist of the future. It's the same Eucharist that, like, the next generations of the church will have and receive, and they'll look back and they'll see that, oh yeah, like it's the Eucharist that like these people in the past had too. And I think like that calls us to something really deep of we partake in something and have this deep relationship with God in Eucharist, but so do all of these other people. And I think that really calls us into that connectedness of like it's kind of communion and community. I think are really kind of essential parts of seeing that. And I like to joke that like really when we participate in Mass, like we're Eucharistic time travelers of kind of that moment that we partake in, and receiving that is, it really connects us into really the past, but also into the next generations, because we do partake and participate with that God who is timeless, with Christ who is timeless in that. And I think with that kind of connectedness to this community across time, I think it should also lead us to a responsibility to love and care for the community.
Pope Francis uses the phrase intergenerational solidarity a lot in Laudato Si, which I think goes great with your reflection on timelessness, the time travel, which I love that image. It's very it brings up a lot that I need to reflect on and think about next time I go to Mass. I think when we consider the sacrifices or the lifestyle changes that are needed to combat climate change and environmental crises, it's often viewed in the lens of sacrifice or burdens, kind of in a negative light. But I think this reflection on the Eucharist and this intergenerational solidarity, this interconnectedness with the future, encourages us to see our familial connection with all creation. And I think that way the lifestyle changes are not viewed as burdens so much, but really acts of love. It's acts out of relationship with a family. It's care and concern and genuine desire for the good of our brothers and sisters. It's a much more positive light, I think, when we consider the changes and sacrifices that are necessary for our caring for our common home.
Man, I think there are sacrifices. I think that we're kind of being called to make as society, and I don't see, like, it's not that we have to go without things, but we have to change what we go with. It's we just need to make more transitions instead of cutting things off, that there are maybe more sustainable ways to do a lot of the stuff that we already do, and just making the necessary transitions into those things. And I think, and that's kind of a lot of the challenges. It can feel a little kind of overwhelming of like, oh, I'm being asked to do all these things. I have to get a new car. I have to completely redo all the energy in my home. I have to do things. And there's also a lot of kind of really practical work and advocacy that can be done of how do we get our communities and maybe our governments and our churches to support us in these journeys as well. And for them to use their positions to help continue to push forward what we need to be doing and focusing on. From a personal standpoint, like if we really look at the world around us and creation of God as kind of this gift, and recognize how God is kind of intimately the creator of everything in all of that, I think we can shift our view of, oh, well, how do we use these gifts? Are we wasteful with them? Do we like if someone gives you a present for Christmas, do you use like a quarter of it and then you just throw the rest out without thinking about the kind of the responsibility and the recognition that comes from that? Or do we do we use a gift and we set the rest of it on fire? Or it's kind of like, those seem like kind of ridiculous things if we had a gift from somebody. So do we recognize creation as such? And it's not, and this is kind of an argument I always make from the scientific standpoint of like, we have to kind of engage the world and use the things of the world if we want to have things like energy and to create things. And like, we do have to take something, but how do we, in the process of that, how do we recognize it as gift from God and do it responsibly?
And part of using any object or any activity that we engage in is thinking about the end toward which it's oriented. And I think this, as Pope Francis concludes his section on the Eucharist, he has this wonderful line that I think is very illuminating. The Eucharist joins heaven and earth. It embraces and penetrates all creation. In the bread of the Eucharist, creation is projected towards divinization, towards unification with the Creator himself. I think if we approach the things of this world that we have to consume as intimately connected to us, and we're all moving toward union with God, toward divinization, that is a radically different approach to consumption than what our society and culture expects of us.
Yeah, it absolutely is. It almost, it kind of flips everything on its head. And I think Franciscans have been good at doing that for a while. That was the idea of Francis, was to be lesser, to be at the bottom, and to really kind of work from there. And I think it's something kind of very natural for us as Franciscans to think about it. We know we need to kind of reverse how we think about the world. And something I say a lot, and this I think it really annoys people when I say this, is people talk, well, things are done this way, and like that's just kind of how they are, and like that's how they should be. Is like, but is that good? And it's like, is that the best way that we can be doing things? Is that so? Even though that we have some of these deep cultural things that might be leading us of, oh, well, we just do things this way, and that's just kind of how it is, and it can be very hard to make headway in that. But it's I think it's always a time for reflective pause of like, oh, can we be doing better? Can we be supporting and loving and caring for our communities better, for our environment better? I think it's something that I return to is kind of the sense of kind of universal responsibility that comes in Eucharist, of that it is something that I partake in. And I think one of the things that sometimes it's like, oh, it's the beginning of Mass, we kind of just forget about it. It's like, no, like we do it kind of an act of contrition almost at the beginning of Mass. Like we ask for the mercy of God. And it's kind of this direction of like, no, we're not perfect. Like we have challenges in our relationships. We have these kind of different things we do fall into times of sin, but it's at one, it's recognizing that it's like, we're not perfect, and but we continue to strive to be, and we do that by being here and participating. And then I think it's by participating in that communion of God, it's continuing to recognize that, like, our universal kind of responsibility to each other, of by saying that, like, I believe that this is what it is. I believe and desire to be in communion with God. It comes with the responsibility of, I desire to live as God intends us to love God and to continue to love one another. Whether that's like kind of going back to our timelessness, like whether it's our community now, but also our community in the future.
I think that care for the future challenge that you're giving us is a wonderful place to conclude, and it's perfectly in light with everything Pope Francis and St. Francis inspire us and challenge us to think about as well. In closing, St. Francis challenged his brothers to always begin again and seek out holy newness in their life of faith. As we come to a close, what is a concrete way for us to hold back nothing of ourselves and bring our whole selves to the Eucharist in new ways?
Probably something that we as Franciscan people, but we as a Catholic community, try to differentiate ourselves from some of the cultural shifts that have happened, especially in kind of maybe like what we would call like Western civilizations of the United States and Europe, is things are so individual and individually focused. So I think it's really trying to spend time in reflection about how communally connected we are, how really deeply interconnected we are in Eucharist, and in that focus of Eucharist being kind of the sense of, oh yeah, I do belong to something bigger. One, I belong to God, the God of the universe, but also into this community of believers, into this community of creation of the entire world. So beyond just ourselves and who are participating in kind of the Catholic Mass, but also to all of creation, that we do have some sort of connection responsibility to it. And so I think that's kind of one of the ways. And another way is just finding something in creation to get involved in. And there's lots of great kind of resources and things out there that people can kind of tap into. And I think one of the beauties of this is you don't need to be a scientist or something like that to advocate for climate justice, to advocate for people on the margins of society. There's room for everyone in that activity of caring for one another. So it's really like doing the work to find, like, oh, how can I participate in this? How can I really can extend this connection that I'm finding in Eucharist out to the rest of the world? And so there's just lots of really great opportunities out there. Maybe it's letter writing, maybe it's maybe you're an accountant and a nonprofit in your area who works on this type of stuff needs a little accounting help. I think that's one of the most common ones that we see, and we're always very gracious for the help that comes when we get it from people with backgrounds like that. Or we always need really good communicators and writers and things like that. So there's room for everybody in this work of God. There's room for everybody in the kingdom of God, and this work is definitely a part of it.
Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you for inviting us into that more expansive vision of the Eucharist, but also of our ways to contribute to climate justice and working for care for our common home. It's easy to get maybe fall into despair, not knowing our place and how we can get involved with caring for the environment. But I think our conversation has opened up some ways to think about on a very practical day-to-day level, both in our spiritual life and in our professional and personal lives, how we can make care for the common home part of our daily life. So thank you for your reflections and encouraging all of us to revitalize our relationship with creation and with God through the Eucharist. As always, thank you to our viewers for letting us share our Franciscan life with you. I hope today's conversation helps you to catch glimpses of the Franciscan vision in your own life. Please join us again next week on Hold Back Nothing for another conversation on the Eucharist in light of our Franciscan life. We will focus on the role of the Eucharist in sustaining our day-to-day life and reflect on how the Eucharist inspires a uniquely Franciscan-hearted approach to leadership and service. We hope you will join us. Until then, may the Lord bless you with peace and all that is good.